Welcome once again to another edition of Digging the Details with Jim and Dean. And I'd like to introduce my co-host. He is a great writer, artist, and a true blue, dyed-in-the-wool Disney historian, Dean Brinkerhoff. Hi, Dean.
Hey, Jim. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's nice to be here in Tulgey Wood again. Jim Fanning, of course, is an amazing Disney historian, author, YouTube sensation, and all-around pop culture enthusiast. And we're happy to share with you some fun details today about Johnny Tremain.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rab, for that great introduction. We are going to be talking about Walt Disney's Johnny Tremain. And Johnny Tremain is something that's always been very important to me as part of the Independence Day celebration.
Same here, Jim.
Somehow, it's another thing that we love that is not as well known as it should be. So, Dean, I'll let you introduce the film for those that may not know what it is.
To the youth of the world, in whose spirit and courage rests the hope of eventual freedom for all mankind, Walt Disney's opening words to Johnny Tremain really lay out what this film is for, and it's for hope and youth and freedom. Johnny Tremain's a film all about the American Revolution, and it's a film about, at its center, the events that led up to the formation of this great nation, the United States. And Boston Tea Party is at the center of this story of revolution and of freedom fighting. And Johnny Tremain was released in 1957 under the Buena Vista handle. It's a movie that really is a little bit more, I guess, unknown to some, but to the dyed-in-the-wool fans, it's a very special one. I've grown up with it and I've really cherished it throughout the years. It stars Hal Stallmaster as Johnny Tremain and has a wonderful supporting cast, and it's grown to have a wonderful legacy throughout the years. Now, Johnny Tremain, the film, is based off of the wonderful novel by Esther Forbes, and this is my copy that I have with a wonderful cover illustration by Michael Tedesco. It's a wonderful book. Jim, could you tell us more about this?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, because it's a favorite of mine. It's been published and republished many times since its original publication in 1943 and has had over the years many different covers. So anybody out there that's looking for it, Dean has that particular edition. There are others. And it is a wonderful read. It's so full of historical details of the locale of Boston at the time of the Revolutionary War and the events leading up to it. So great detail about everyday life, what people wore and how they talked. It's a book that continues to be read today, often in schools and on many levels. Some people read it in elementary school, in high school. I read it in college as part of a class. That's where I became introduced to the book, I think even before I saw the movie. It's so rich and of high literary value. And one reason for that is that Esther Forbes is also the author of this classic work, Paul Revere and the World He Lived In. This was published in 1942, and Esther Forbes did tremendous research, just an unbelievable amount of research into the world of colonial America, specifically in Boston, and the life of Paul Revere. So when she had written this adult work, which won the Pulitzer Prize for history, she took that same research and created a book that was intended for young people, Johnny Tremain. And of course, Paul Revere is a character in that book. Johnny Tremain is a fictional character, but it's filled with real people, including Paul Revere, who of course was, as we see in this famous painting, a silversmith. And Johnny is an apprentice silversmith. So you can see how it's all being tied together. How brilliant of her to have done this work of nonfiction and then create a fictional work based on the same research. And then Johnny Tremain won the Newbery Prize, which is a very high honor for a work of children's literature. So she won the Pulitzer Prize and then the Newbery Medal in succession. So Walt Disney became aware of Johnny Tremain and bought the rights and saw it as a wonderful property that could be for originally the Disneyland TV show, Frontierland, the Frontierland realm, because that includes the Revolutionary War time, and he wanted to cover that.
Certainly.
But it also feeds into what we had talked about in our video about James MacArthur. It's a story about teenagers, and they are rebels with a cause. And the interesting thing about the character of Johnny, if you read the book, in the book he's extremely unlikable. He does go through a great journey. He becomes a more likable and honorable character because that's his arc. But he's very conceited and thinks very highly of himself, and that changes over the course of the story. So there's a semblance of that, but I think in a Walt Disney movie, you're not going to find a main character that's quite that unlikable. So
no, I think Walt definitely wanted to have that more of a role model in the starring role.
Indeed. And the central event in the film that kind of starts things rolling for Johnny, changes his life, is his accident that, spoiler alert, he has an accident in his silversmith activities that is a result of his overconfidence, and his employer says pride goeth before a fall. Of course, he's quoting scripture, the heavily religious Boston of the time.
Yeah,
and you're meant to understand that that's a truth. So and it shines a spotlight on Johnny as being a little too conceited and a little too self-centered. So his character becomes involved in the events of the Revolutionary War, and because of that, he starts to look outward. He's not just thinking about himself. He's thinking about a community and a cause that has high ideals. And of course, he meets some of the figures, again, such as Paul Revere, that show him the high ideals. But you started out with that great Walt Disney quote about the youth. And again, Walt did not like films about juvenile delinquents, but he did like stories about teenagers because he knew that was a big audience. So this is something he was geared toward, and he also knew that the young children liked stories about teenagers because they looked up to them.
I love that distinction you've made between the characters and the personalities of Johnny between the book and the film, because certainly in the film, Johnny is a little more of a humble, normal hero who is on a search for who he is and where he comes from. And he is just a very likable character, typical Disney hero. It's really interesting to have that distinction in mind as you look at the film versus the book. The way Walt would tweak things a little here and there to make it more Disney-fied. He really wanted to have an inspiring story, and certainly was inspiring for me. The scene in particular where he does burn his hand and has the accident was always a shocking one in my mind as a young teenager. Disney is, known for having very wholesome and I guess non-shocking content at times, but that one was shocking to me as a child, seeing someone get hurt so badly. And of course it isn't graphic, but it's always just very, I find admirable that Walt would go to those darker places at times and show the real drama and angst of, pain. And Johnny's life is ruined at this accident. He can't work. He can't, admit that he was working on the Sabbath. He can't do all of these sort of things that he wants to do. And then he is accused, more spoiler alerts, of being a thief. And this is a life-threatening set of circumstances for Johnny that is very inspiring to see him overcome and move towards throughout the story as he becomes this hero of the revolution.
Yes, beautifully put. And I did want to show this article that I wrote for Sketches Magazine about Johnny Tremain. It has some wonderful photos in it from the Disney Photo Library, including some Peter Allen Shaw art and so forth. But one reason I wanted to point it out now is that here we have a picture of Walt. Here we have Hal Stallmaster, who of course plays Johnny Tremain, as you mentioned, Walt Disney, and also director Robert Stevenson, who became Disney's top live-action director, and this was his first Disney film. So it's very, very significant. And of course, Robert Stevenson was British, so that he brought a special dimension to this story of the colonies breaking away from Great Britain.
And in addition to Hal Stallmaster in the cast, we have a wonderful supporting cast of Luana Patton as Priscilla, or Scylla for short, Lapham, as Johnny's friend, and Jeff York as James Otis, and Sebastian Cabot as Jonathan Light. Wonderful supporting cast, and a few other names that are on this film list also. Jeff York is wonderful in his scenes, and Luana Patton, of course, is wonderful. She's one of Walt Disney's first real big stars, and starred along with Bobby Driscoll in Song of the South and So Dear to My Heart. It's really neat to see her return as a more mature woman, and she was only a young girl in those original films. And Jeff York is a Disney veteran as well. He is known for his role as Mike Fink in the Davy Crockett and the River Pirates, and his supporting role in Old Yeller, among other films.
Yes, and it's astonishing to see Jeff York play this very, very different character. It really shows his range, because he often played more comedic characters, as he did in the films you've mentioned, in Old Yeller and Davy Crockett.
Right.
And here is a serious dramatic role where he's almost unrecognizable. He's a true character actor.
He very much has an aura of strength and prowess in this film versus that more comedic side.
And what's the name of his character?
James Otis is one of the original leaders of the Revolution, who is friends with Thomas Paine, author of Common Sense, and he is famous for coining the taxation without representation as tyranny. Very, very sometimes overlooked founding father, but plays a very major role in this film as being a rallying cry, and gives an inspiring speech to the faltering patriots who are getting a little discouraged, and really gives an inspiring, almost tear-jerking speech in the film. It's certainly my favorite scene of the entire thing.
It's very moving, and in this story that is about youth and focuses on the youthful hero, he uses that speech to uplift youth. And I think it's Walt's way of telling the audience. He tells young people, especially the young viewers watching the film, it's up to you. Liberty is up to you.
It's a very inspiring message.
And you had mentioned some of the other casting. I'd like to emphasize Sebastian Cabot. He was a key Disney player, and here he's playing a villainous character, if you will, someone who's the antagonist against Johnny and causes a great deal of trouble for him unjustly. He's meant to be a representation of this whole idea of class, where he saw himself the better because he was rich. And of course, the American ideal, at least, is that we're all equal. So he brilliantly plays the role. There's a touch of humor to it as well. And he's seen without his beard, so that's quite remarkable.
Wonderful, accomplished Disney key player, as you so eloquently put.
And he went on to most famously be the narrator for the Disney Winnie the Pooh featurettes. So as we've mentioned, Johnny Tremain was originally supposed to be on the Disneyland TV show. Walt lavished a huge budget on it, and also it came out so beautifully it was decided to release it to theaters. But it's one reason that it's divided into two parts. The first part, as you mentioned, focusing on the Boston Tea Party, the second on the shot heard around the world. But it works beautifully as a theatrical film. So instead of originally having Johnny Tremain on the Disneyland TV show, he did something else on the Disneyland TV show to celebrate the release of Johnny Tremain in theaters. And maybe you'd like to tell us about that.
Well, there's a wonderful Disneyland television special named The Liberty Story, which is available right now on Disney Plus. Interestingly enough, Johnny Tremain, the film isn't quite available yet, but you can still catch a lot of the film in that Disneyland television show right now for those who are subscribers. It does talk about the Johnny Tremain story, and also Walt gives a wonderful overview of the revolution of the American Patriots, and then it also has a wonderful animated sequence, Ben and Me. Wonderful little story about Benjamin Franklin and a little mouse named Amos who was there for all of it, and it's all his doing, and Ben Franklin had nothing to do with it. So a little bit of twisted history there, but it's really fun. I definitely recommend it for anyone who's either not seen it or has a fascination for Disney history as well, and the wonderful classic entertainment of Walt's era.
I agree, and it's a wonderful show, and it's very informative, fascinating, and fun. It's also in glorious black and white. So it's also odd that we see Ben and Me in its entirety in black and white, even though it's not available elsewhere on Disney Plus in color. And it's baffling to me that Disney Plus should be showing the Liberty Story that shows scenes from Johnny Tremain, and yet the movie itself is not on. So I don't know what the thinking is behind that. But we're glad we have the Liberty Story anyhow.
And we're certainly looking forward to an eventual release to Disney Plus. The Liberty Story is one of my traditions every year around Independence Day, and mainly for its wonderful informative nature, but also its fun nature, as you said, Jim. And no Disney film would be complete without its song, which this film has a lot of wonderful music in it, and as well as a couple great songs.
It's very telling that Walt begins the Liberty Story with the main song from Johnny Tremain, which is the Liberty Tree. The Liberty Tree song was written by the screenwriter Tom Blackburn for the lyrics, and the music composed by the composer of the film's music, George Bruns. Interestingly, these two were responsible for the mega hit, The Ballad of Davy Crockett. They served the same creative roles in the Davy Crockett TV shows. And I think they, again, did a wonderful job with that particular song. I think it was just last year that the score and songs were released as the sort of deluxe CD, which also has some wonderful liner notes in it. This has so much of the score and the songs as well. The Liberty Tree song is also heard at Magic Kingdom Park and Walt Disney World often because they have Liberty Square. And I have a printout of an article I wrote about Liberty Square, the center of which is the Liberty Tree, as seen in Johnny Tremain, with 13 lanterns representing the 13 colonies. You can often hear some of the score and certainly the song, The Liberty Tree, at Liberty Square. The other song that is only heard instrumentally is Johnny Tremain. Lyrics were written but were not used in the film. But it's Johnny's theme, so it's heard throughout the movie, especially when Johnny is on screen. And since he's the main character, that's a lot. To go back to this CD, it includes a Disneyland Records recording of the Johnny Tremain song. And it's really fun. It's really kind of like a folk song. Since the Ballad of Davy Crockett was much the same, Blackburn and Bruns were a good team to come up with that sort of thing.
Johnny Tremain of old Boston town, remember his name, he fought in homespun brown. Fought and won 'cause his heart was free, fought and won for liberty. Johnny Tremain, Johnny Tremain. He didn't like red coats worth a hoot, and didn't like red in any suit. Boston town was loaded with tea, he up and dumped it in the sea.
Wonderful.
The lyrics are really tremendous.
I certainly agree, Jim, on the amazing quality of the music in this film, and the songs are absolutely wonderful. It's a film definitely to cherish and to experience again and again. Though we mentioned it isn't on Disney Plus, it is, however, available here on DVD, a wonderful 2005 release that includes the film, and the Liberty story is included on here, as well as a couple of Walt Disney television introductions. So look for that. You can find it on Shop Disney or some of your local movie stores, and online too. It's a must-have for your collection, especially someone like me who loves the physical copy.
I agree with your assessment that it's a must-have. And speaking of must-haves, I think that your presence online is a must-have for any Disney fan and fans of wonderful writing and appreciation of cinema, etc. So where can we find you online, Dean?
Yeah, you can find my review of Johnny Tremain on my Instagram page, Dean Brinkerhoff Reviews, along with many other classic Disney films that I've reviewed in the past. And you can also find me on Facebook under that same handle.
And isn't there somewhere that we can also find some of your art?
Certainly, Jim. My art can be found on Instagram as well under DB Art 1994. And I'd love to connect with any of you who are interested in talking more about cinema and film and art. They're all such fascinating things to discuss and have meaningful conversations about, and a wonderful place to have great conversations and meet new people. So where can we find you, Jim?
Here on my YouTube channel, you can find not only Digging the Details with Jim and Dean, but also VIP visits and other videos. And my Instagram handle is jim.fanning1. Same with Facebook. And on Twitter, I'm at Emilius Brown. And my blog is, you can just simply look up Jim Fanning Tulgey Wood. It'll come up, but it's jim@tulgeywood.blogspot.com.
Highly recommended to check out Jim's blog. It is one of my absolute favorite things to read.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate that. So once again, we'd like to thank all of you for watching. Please come back to Tulgey Wood TV for a new edition of Digging the Details with Jim and Dean soon. And he's Dean.
And he's Jim.
And we'll see you again soon with more Digging the Details.